Air and water, about the only two things outside the realm of economic analysis. Notice I did not say clean air and clean water. They are open to economic analysis. But what I try to show my students is that non-market activities are open to be investigated using economic theory. And the example I'd often use is the death penalty. So what I want to show you in this video is how to make a case either for or against the death penalty using sound economic doctrine. First thing, standard demand theory. Price goes up, quantity goes down, price goes down, quantity goes up. So how do you look at this for the death penalty? Well, assuming death is a higher price for the criminal to pay than life in prison, that demand theory will tell us that if you have the death penalty, you'll have fewer murders in your state. And this is the first main point. If the state has the death penalty on the books and actually use it, there will be fewer murders per capita in that state. And study after study has shown this to be true. I actually was at a conference one time and a paper was presented where they looked at type of execution. And sure enough, if you have electrocution in your state compared to states that use lethal injection, you'll have a greater decrease in the number of murders, with electrocution being a higher price than lethal injection. So as I said, study after study has shown this is true, that even if you did more research on it, try to get the paper published, everybody's going to ignore that paper because it's just been shown so many times the death penalty is effective in reducing murder rates. So please, if you want to argue against the death penalty with the "I don't think it will have any effect," you will come off looking very uninformed and people will ignore you because now you're just stating an opinion which the facts do not bear out. But hang in there, I'll show you a way around this problem. So if you are pro death penalty, economic analysis has shown that lives will be saved. And who can put a value on those lives? Of course we should use the death penalty. Now, for some deeper economic analysis for those who are against the death penalty. This is where the concept of elasticity comes in. Yes, if you have the death penalty in a state, you will have fewer murders. But how many fewer murders? And if you got to this point of the video and you're finding it informative, interesting, do me a favor, little button right down there, hit the subscribe button. I constantly say this, but very few people do, so buck the trend. Hit the subscribe button, make my day, I'll appreciate it. Okay, back to the elasticity issue. How much does quantity change when you change price? Again, we turn to the research papers. The answer is very few lives will be saved. In a state like Arizona, 1, 2 a year. California, of course, being a larger state, will have more, smaller states less effects. But you don't really reduce the murder rate by that much. And I think the main reason is murder is generally a crime of passion. People aren't thinking about the repercussions of their actions when they're in the heat of the moment and they end up murdering someone. So, okay, if you're against the death penalty, you need more than just this, saying, well, it doesn't save that many lives. All lives have value. Now, can you actually sit down and try to compute the value of a human life? Now, I know this may sound cold, but yes, you can put a value on a human life. We do it all the time. Assume someone's killed by a drunk driver. Their surviving family sues the driver of the car because they want to be compensated for their loss. This happens all the time. So, how do you figure out that level of compensation? Simple. Average salary per year that that person was earning times the number of work years that person has left before retirement. Therefore, you now have the value of a human life. I know it sounds cold, but you got to come up with some way to do it. And that's how it's done in court cases. But you can't just stop there because now it's time for cost benefit analysis. We just figured out the benefit of having the death penalty, but what's the cost of the death penalty? What does it actually cost the state to execute someone? Well, just to give you a little information, in 2020, Arizona spent $1.5 million to purchase 1,000 vials of the lethal injection drug pentobarbital. It was used on 3 convicts. So there's $500,000 per convict. And then you have to think about the average time somebody spends on death row. The latest numbers I could find say about 20 years. Someone from the time they're sentenced to be executed till the actual date of the execution, about 20 years. Now, during this time, both sides spent huge amount of money going through the appeals process. Lawyers, expert witnesses. So, bottom line is, it is very expensive for the state to execute a convicted individual. So, for the anti death penalty individual, the argument should be made that the cost of executing someone is far greater than the value of the life saved. And if the cost is greater than the benefits, you don't do it. So, in this situation, the cost of execution greater than the value of the saved life, death penalty makes no sense. So that's a nice logical argument against the death penalty. And whoever makes the case along these lines sounds a lot better than I just don't think it will have any effect. Now, there's a few extra things I want to throw in here. If you get into debate, some people are going to say, don't have the death penalty, just lock them up and throw away the key. And then somebody else is going to come back with, do you know how expensive it is to keep someone in prison? Well, it varies significantly by state and facility, with estimates to being around $23,000 to over $300,000 annually, with the national median around $65,000. So if anybody throws data like that at you, saying, "Oh, just execute them because they might have 50 years left to live," and at the median $65,000, that's a fortune. So that has to be cheaper to execute them than to do that. That's really bad analysis. One thing economics is noted for is we really like to use marginal analysis, and marginal means one more. Actually, an infinitesimal amount more, but we're just going to say one more. And I would argue that the marginal cost of putting someone in prison is approximately $0. Because if you think about it, we're not looking at all the prisoners. Someone's standing before a judge. They've been convicted of murder. Judge says, life in prison, no parole. Does the prison system have to hire more guards, more food? You know, if they're making enough food to feed 500 people, they have enough food to feed 501. So the bottom line is no extra money is going to be spent to put that individual in jail for life. So don't go with that. Oh, how much it costs to keep somebody in prison? It's really expensive, cheaper just to execute them. No. Now, hey, I'm just an economist. And what I gave you is an economic approach to the death penalty. And I'm the first one to admit there are more things to think about when it comes to this issue. How about this one? Wrongful convictions. You can look up numbers of how many people were sentenced to death and some who were executed, who were then later found to be innocent. We haven't talked about the pain and suffering of the family of the person who was murdered. I didn't put that in the calculations. I just did the value of their life. And it comes down to, for some people, just the morality of the idea, or the state is sanctioning murder. And a lot of people have a real trouble with the morality of that. So there's all these other things you can discuss. I'm just giving you the piece of the puzzle here with the economics. And I can't think of any reason why you'd be concerned about my personal opinion. I am generally against the death penalty. And I think this comes from me being the economist, and I do the cost benefit analysis. And it's just not economically justifiable along those lines to have the death penalty. But I do make two exceptions to this. The first one being you're in jail, sentenced to life without parole, and you murder somebody. You shouldn't be able to get a free murder. I would be okay with the death penalty in that case. And also contract murders, where someone with so much forethought put it into the whole calculations of whether to do it or not. We're not now talking about a crime of passion. We're talking about a cold, calculating murder. I'd probably support the death penalty for that. Well, thank you for watching, and I'm going to do an experiment here. The upcoming end screen will have a suggestion generated by YouTube based upon their algorithm, what they think will be the best, most enjoyable video for you to watch next. So let me know if they were right. Again, thank you for watching. Have yourself a blessed day.